Hello everyone. Today's video will be about maps. Someone asked some time ago, like what's important for a good map, and asked me to make a video about like what I think. Well, like what are the factors for a good map? So I wrote down some points, and I will give you some examples. So first of all, for a good map, you need a sufficient rush distance. I mean, we all remember the times of great train wrecks like Steps of War, Delta Quadrant. I mean, like every map pretty much except for Desert Oasis back then had actually pretty short rush distances, in some spawns at least. So actually, Incineration Zone is another good example. Like those maps are just like terrible, and yes, like the biggest problem, like the most obvious one, is obviously that the rush distance was way too short in stuff like 2 racks, SCV all-ins, and like 2 gate from Protoss. Like I'm talking about the Zerg matchups now. Like those were very strong. In ZVZ it was hard to get an expansion up, and I'm sure TVP, like one base bio stim all-ins, were super strong against Protoss, and well, like 4 gates for Protoss, I guess, against both races. And yeah, like that's just, it just doesn't work. I think you can't really balance the game, and also the game would have like a lot of variance. Like the better player has a lot less room to actually show that he is good. And Delta Quadrant, I actually hated Delta Quadrant even more than Steps of War, because you couldn't even scout sometimes, because what if you scouted your opponent last position and he went for 2 racks? Well, like, I mean, everyone 2 racks, so like 5 racks 3, but that one was even better. Anyway, so yeah, rush distance. Then the next point, the main base. Obviously the main base, it needs to be like decently big. Like you need some space to build buildings, like production. I mean, as a Zerg player, I don't really care about that, but Terran and Protoss, they need like some space to build up their production. Then what I think is really important is that there is a ramp from the main to the natural. There's some maps that don't have that. For example, Tal'Darim Altar. I think I guess like that's like the most famous example. Tal'Darim Altar, no main to the no ramp to the main base. That creates very big problems in PvP and ZVP, and to an extent, I guess, also in some other matchup. But those are like the best examples. Like ZVZ, usually like you can easily expand in that matchup, but on Tal'Darim Altar, because there's no ramp that you can block with queens, like one base ling, baneling is very common there, and I don't know, like I just think that's boring as fuck by now. I mean, yeah, like that's what you just have to do, and like expanding, like going hedge first or some kind of pool, like speedling expand, like that's actually very dangerous to play on that map. Good example, Stefano against Vortex in Sweden, where Stefano thought it was a good idea to go speedling expand against a one basing opponent, and he just died, more or less. I'm not sure. I think like in that's also one of the reasons why I don't really like Heart of the Swamp. There's like some fucking bad maps. Like I think it's like Core Hall City or so. It has like a backdoor expansion, which I also hate, and then there's like a huge ass ramp to the main, like not like the normal ramp that you can block with 2 queens to make it like airtight. And yeah, so yeah, please give us like just a normal ramp. Like don't do fancy shit with the ramp from the main to the natural. Then the natural, it should be close to the main ramp. That's very important. First of all, for ZVT, if the natural is far away from the main ramp, then you can protect your natural and your main ramp at the same time against Hellions. A good example would be Xel'Naga Caverns. I mean, that map, it like people thought it was good for a long time, when it was actually like very imbalanced, especially ZVT. Like I remember, like you had to build fucking 2 spine crawlers, and then like as soon as your creep got to your main ramp, you like hurried to build an evo chamber there, so the Hellions just couldn't just drive into your main base and like kill all your drones. And that leads me to the next point. The natural can't be too open, like Xel'Naga Caverns. Protoss Forge expands against Zerg very hard like very problematic because there's so much surface area, so much area you have to cover with cannons. Then Zerg against Terran, against like simple reactor Hellion opening, you had to build like 2 spine crawlers and an evo chamber to block the main ramp off a bit, just to be like just not to die like instantly to Hellions, because you can't, like, roaches against Hellions early game is no good, never has been, even though some smart people have tried that, but I think it's crap. And yeah, so you build 2 spines like at 30 supply, which seems pretty ridiculous, and like that just led to like Terran just like builds 4 Hellions and then Marine tank all in, because you invested so much into defending against the Hellions that like it was super hard to defend against, like just like Marine tank follow up, for example, from two base. And yeah, it also, like CVC, it's also really bad if the natural is far away from the main ramp, because then you can't build a spine crawler that protects your queens that are blocking the main ramp against like 1 base all-ins, for example. So there it needs to be like Tal'Darim is actually also like it's pretty hard to immediately put down a spine that protects your ramp, which is non-existent, I guess, but still. Like Shakuras is a good example, for example. It's I mean, I don't like the map that much in general, but it has a ramp to the main, and the natural to the map is a rather tight, like there's a bit of a ramp. It's like it's not super small. That's also important. It can't be like the same ramp as like main to natural, because if it's that, then like for example Protoss can just go like Nexus Gate core, and they can just skip the Forge against Zerg, because well, you can close the ramp with 1 force field, and like that would also cause problems. Like then like you need like a bit of a like access to the natural. Like I think like Ohana is like the smallest. Like it shouldn't get smaller than Ohana. I already think Ohana might be a bit too small, but it's okay. So don't, like, not too small, but not like definitely it shouldn't be too open. Like all the current maps like show that like Cloud Kingdom is pretty small, like easily to defend like your Forge expansion against Zerg, like your natural against Hellions as Zerg. Like if you're a Protoss, defend against early like pressure from Terran and stuff like that. Like if it's too open, it's so hard. Like for Protoss, for example, against Terran, like if Xel'Naga caverns, then or like also the other way around. Like it's just like too much area that you have to cover, and so then it actually becomes pretty hard to take an expansion. You might as well just 1 base all in, because that's easier. So yes, Daybreak has a fairly big like access to the natural, like if you look at today's maps, but it's still like that's okay, I would say. Then the third base. The third base, that it gets tricky, but still I think there's a lot of limitations. It can't be too far away from the natural, like, and by that I mean like rocks need to, like rocks are basically like normal terrain at the start, because especially with Zerg, like you can't kill rocks early on, because your Zerglings only do like 3 damage per hit, or 2, 3. I'm not sure. I think they have. Yeah, I'm not sure, but Zerglings do like no damage to rocks, and rocks are hard to kill early on, and that's early on is when it matters the most, in my opinion. So remember Xel'Naga caverns? Like either you had rocks at the third, or rocks between the natural and the third. So the third base, well, you either took like the gold base, which had rocks at it, or the one that like was like all the way around the rocks between natural and third, so it was super far away actually, because you couldn't kill the rocks early on. So what are other examples? Shakuras, the third base is too far away on Shakuras, or it's too much open into the map. Like if you take the one that is towards the watchtower, you are expanding like towards your opponent, and generally that's not something that Zerg pretty much never wants to do that. And also Protoss like often doesn't want to do that. But taking the other third makes it like there's too much like space between natural and third. Like first of all, there's a lot of space and there's a lot of distance. So like it's too hard to defend it. Then the next thing, obviously there should never ever be rocks at the third. Like no Tal'Darim, please. I mean they fixed that now, but like that's just like so fucked up to have rocks at the third base, because well, like I mean, Terran and Protoss probably doesn't care that much about it, but Zerg just can't take like an early-ish third base if there's rocks there, because you need to really invest a lot into units to kill those, which hurts your opponent, so your economy so much that you might not as well not take a third base and just like go for like drones and tech and then take it later on. And other examples for that, Delta Quadrant had like the natural was super open and there's rocks at the third base, and the other third bases with the golds, like oh my god, like there was rocks everywhere and gold bases everywhere. Talking about gold bases, I think no gold bases, because gold bases are like imbalanced by default, because the race that benefits the most from gold bases is Terran, then Zerg, because well Terran has Marines, which are a pretty good unit if you ask me, and they have Marauders. Not that I care that much about Marauders personally, but I know a bunch of Protoss friends on Skype that do, and so please no gold bases. Then Zerg, at least they have Zerglings. Roaches don't cost all too much gas either. And then Protoss. Well, they have Zealots, I guess. But I think most Protoss players don't like Zealots that much. I guess with speed against Terran it's okay. But then Terran has Marines and Marauders, which benefit way more from gold bases. So, like, I think gold bases is very hard to balance. I mean, not saying it's impossible, but that's something you should be very careful with. And like today's maps, like think about it. Where do you have a gold base? I guess you don't have a gold base anywhere. It's just like I remember Antigua with gold bases. Terran is like 50 supply behind against Zerg. Lands a command center at the gold base, drops 10 mules. Suddenly he's 50 supply ahead. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but like those kind of games where like the Marines go like and then suddenly everything dies because the Terran had a lot of Marines all of a sudden. Like 5 SCVs, 10 mules, better than 3 base economy. What else did I think of? The path between the natural and the third. I think I actually said that already, but it can't be too open. Like I already said, Shakuras between natural and third is basically like an open space, or well, like generally it's an open space almost. Like if you take like the third towards the watchtower, there's still a lot of open space. But now think about like maps that are actually like played for quite some time. Daybreak. There's no open space between natural and third. It's this high ground plateau, not high ground, but just like this blocking thing in the middle there. Cloud Kingdom, same thing. There's no space, like there's no open space between natural and third. Entombed Valley, that's like the anti-Zerg variation. If you kill the rocks, which Zerg can't do early on, then there is no open space. But if you can't, well, then there's a lot of open space, which sucks. And so that's also one of the reasons why, like next to some other things, why Entombed is so bad for Zerg, because Zerg has open space towards their third base, but the other two races basically don't, because like super early on Zerg usually can't get aggressive, and then when they can, like the open space doesn't matter anymore, because then the rocks are dead. Then next thing is the third. It can't be too open. Think of what's a good example for a too open third base? Metalopolis maybe. Actually, that was okay-ish. But Metalopolis like had that problem to an extent. Like, well, both the natural and the third were like somewhat open, and like for example, that made it kinda hard for Protoss to defend a third base against Zerg, for example, but it wasn't too bad. I'm thinking of a good example right now. Jungle Basin, for example. Like, yeah, like I mean, taking a third base as Zerg, that was pretty hard on that map. Like, you could like attack from like 360 degree. And there was like watchtowers with like small pathways leading to it, so that to make sure that like 2 force fields like really catch all the roaches. And yes, like there was just like too much like attack waste to the third base, and like the third bases on the side were extremely hard to defend because the pathways there were too small, which leads us to the next point. The third can't, like, you need to have like some pathways or one pathway to it, but the pathway can neither be too small or not too big, because too big it's too hard to defend, for example for Protoss, but if it gets too small it's too hard to defend for Zerg against force fields. Think about Cloud Kingdom. Cloud Kingdom is actually already a bit borderline. Immortal pushes on Cloud Kingdom are actually pretty hard to defend sometimes if it's executed well, because I mean, like, oftentimes it just turns into a base trade, because if Protoss comes along like that little pathway in the bottom or top of the map towards your third base, like, he doesn't need that many force fields to just force field on both sides. Even if you flank him, like split your army half-half, you just attack on both sides. He just cuts out one side completely and cuts the other side in half, kills 1/4 of your army without many losses. And imagine that pathway was a bit smaller even. Like, it would be even easier. There would, like, Protoss would lead like another force field or two less. And then, like, they could do that like endlessly, which would mean, like, if Protoss Immortal all-ins, only you would always need to base trade against it. And yeah, I don't know, like, that's not too great, like, of a gameplay. So the third base, like, you need like some flanking, like room for flanking when the third base gets attacked. Otherwise, Protoss 2 base all-ins become very, very strong, because you can't always like catch the Protoss that is approaching out on the map, because oftentimes you are just like starting to build your units when he's approaching, and like he builds like his pylon, and then has to wait a bit till his pylon finishes and so on. So that gives you some time. But if Protoss, like, if you can't fight anymore once Protoss is basically like somewhat close to your third base, because it's too how do you say, like, too tight the area, then yeah, well that sucks. Yes, then some overall points. There need to be like multiple like real attack paths. A good example of bad design in that regard is Shakuras. Of course, there's like, in theory, you have 3 attack paths, but 2 of them are blocked by 2 rocks each, and the middle is like 1 attack path more than 2, because there's just like 1, and like if someone has both the watchtowers and has his army standing there, yeah, well, that's basically 1 attack path. And the side attack paths, they are very like tight, and you have to break them open, which costs you time, which oftentimes you don't have. And then like coming like out of like that narrow choke point, which is also not too far away from the middle where your opponent will have the army if he controls the map, that's just no good. So that's really like a big problem. Another problem where like that kinda comes into place is Antigua. Yes, like, you have like quite a lot of space in the middle, but if your opponent has the watchtower and like has a bit of visions like around the watchtower, like outside of the watchtower vision, he will always, like, if he has the watchtower, it's very hard like to engage, because like running around the watchtower, like, he will see you coming most likely, and then he can position himself accordingly. So the watchtower on Antigua, it's like, it's too dominant. Like, other examples of like very dominant watchtowers is like Jungle Basin, I guess, Shakuras. Generally, I think watchtowers are a good thing, but like in some maps, they are too like dominant, and Antigua is actually a good example of a map that is still being played. Like, if Terran has the watchtower, then like both Zerg and Protoss are pretty fucked, especially Zerg, but I guess Protoss too. I think no Protoss doesn't like Antigua, and like also in like mirror matchups, like that watchtower like really creates like a lot of problems. Like it's just like so hard. Like, once your opponent has the watchtower, like GG, you're done, because it's very hard like to move around it and such. And that's why like a good map like with multiple attack paths is Cloud Kingdom. Actually, there's 2 watchtowers, but they are not too powerful, because you can move around them. Like, you can attack elsewhere, and like Cloud Kingdom has like some problems, but generally I actually kind of like Cloud Kingdom, because like the watchtower is not too dominant. There's multiple attack paths, so that's really a map that is very good in like the regard of like having like different ways to attack your opponent, and like not having like this dominant position in the middle of the map. Another example actually of very dominant watchtower and like not enough attack path is Tal'Darim Altar close positions. Cross position, you don't have that problem at all, obviously, but close position CVT. If Terran gets to the watchtower, yes, you can run around the watchtower, but that takes a lot of time, especially if you try to avoid the watchtower vision, and it's not that much good for you because, well, Terran still has the watchtower, so if you want to flank him, like, he will see you coming, and attacking the natural is kind of dangerous because, like, the access to it, like, is fairly small, like the ramp leading up to the natural and such. So like, that's also, like, those are like very dominant watchtowers, which I think are a bit of a problem. Then the amount of watchtowers, I think, like, somewhere between 2 and 4, like, also depending on, like, the amount of how many amount of spawns on the map. I guess, like, one watchtower maps are also okay, but I think, like, generally, like, 2 to 4, depending on, like, on a 2-player map, I think, like, 2 watchtowers is actually a pretty good number. For example, Cloud Kingdom, again, Daybreak. Those are, like, I think, the example where, like, the watchtowers work out pretty well. Like, the problem with the one watchtower maps is that oftentimes, like, the one watchtower, it has to be in the middle of the map, otherwise it's not symmetric. And then that one watchtower, like, it's often too powerful, as I said, like on Antigua. And so having, like, 2 watchtowers, or maybe 4, 3 seems a bit of a weird number, but 2 or 4 is often better because it does not create, like, such a dominant position, which is often, like, favored towards one race. And I guess one last general point is that you have to be careful with, like, the airspace you leave around bases. For example, Shakuras, first of all, there's positional imbalance with how much, like, how big and how much airspace there is behind the bases. I'm not, like, I don't play much Shakuras anymore, admittedly, but I know that, like, I think at the bottom positions, or the top, sorry, I think bottom positions, you have, like, less airspace behind the bases, or, like, the airspace is, like, smaller. And generally, like, a lot of airspace around the bases is pretty problematic, I think, in TVP for Protoss, because, like, dropping for the Terran, like, he can drop in so much more locations, and Banshees are obviously also much stronger because they can fly in from more directions. And obviously, for Zerg, it's actually pretty good, like, at least not bad, because against Protoss you can you have more, like, attack angles for your mutas, and same against Terran. But also, like, in late game for Zerg, it starts to get bad because Protoss has a lot more angles where War Prisms can fly in, and so I think generally it's probably better to not have too much airspace around. Especially your main base, but also, like, main base, natural third, like maps where you can see that it's like Antigua, or well, basically no airspace, and then Cloud Kingdom, Daybreak has some but limited. I think that's okay, but then when you think about, like, Shakuras, the top right spawn, you basically have, like, 360-degree from which air units can come in, and what other maps are there? I think, like, actually, like, Delta Quadrant, but I mean, that's super old and outdated, but yes, like, that one had a lot of airspace. Not that it really matters, but yes. One last point I wanted to make that I forgot earlier is that I think the natural can't be a backdoor expansion, because I think it favors Protoss too much, to be honest. I think of Jungle Basin. Protoss could go, like, Nexus, Gate, Core against the Zerg, just skipping the Forge completely, because well, I mean, there were rocks, but as we all know, rocks, like, take pretty long to kill early game, and so you just it, like, especially it allows 2 efficient builds for Protoss, but also partly for Terran, and it doesn't do much good for Zerg, especially if the ramp to the main base, like on Jungle Basin, is very far away from the main from the creep, so that actually, like, there's, like, no benefit for Zerg, and that's also why another thing with the Heart of the Swarm map pool. Like there's one map like Core Hall City, I think, that has a backdoor expansion, and I'm really not a fan of backdoor expansions. Yeah, I think it's too good for Protoss in general. There might be some maps like where it's like evens out by like making maybe the third a bit harder to take, and like giving Zerg like a good third base that is somewhat easy to defend against like 2 base all-ins. But generally, I think backdoor expansions are very hard to balance, and all the maps that had them like are not played anymore. Jungle Basin and Calm Before the Storm come into mind. I guess like some of you remember like Calm Before the Storm. I mean, macro games are nice, but it really like, for example, I remember MC tried to do something funny like just go like immediately go for like carrier mothership like straight from the start, just because like I don't know, like Zerg just couldn't attack a Protoss there before Protoss like tries to take the 4th base, pretty much, or at least it was too hard. Like I mean, it didn't work for MC, but that's another story. And yeah, I guess I forgot some points, especially points about TVP and like the Protoss and Terran mirror matchups, because obviously I don't have that much clue about those matchups, and so yeah, I didn't want to talk too much about that. And I guess my view is of course slightly biased towards Zerg because, well, I play Zerg myself, and so I'm biased. I don't want to give any tips to maps makers here. That will be all too bad for myself. And yeah, I hope you liked this video. I don't know, like I'm generally not too good with map making, and I've never made a map, and I will probably never make one. And I don't think about it all too much, but I just thought it was a good question, and so I guess I answered it, at least to an extent. Good night, guys.